Welcome to Birth as We Know It, a podcast that is dedicated to recognizing the many different ways that birth unfolds. I am your host, Kiona Nessenbaum. I have experienced birth as a doula, a student midwife, a birth assistant, and as a mother of 3 amazing children of my own. After attending over 140 births, I've realized that each birth experience is truly unique. So make sure you subscribe and join me as we are guided through many different birth experiences through the lens of the storyteller. Please be aware that some of these stories can be triggering to hear. So feel free to pause, take a breath, and come back and listen whenever you're ready. With that said, let's prep ourselves to dive deep and get detailed about what really happens in the birth space. As a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and has no intention of giving or replacing any medical advice. All advice that is given on the podcast is from the personal experiences of the storytellers. All medical or health-related questions should be directed to your licensed provider. Before we dive into this episode today, I just want to say that by you listening to this podcast right now, you're officially a Baki community member. In order to take that one step further, I would love for you to join the private Baki community on Facebook. You can do that by going to birthasweknowitpodcast.com/community. Every Friday, I ask a question to get the conversations moving. Now, if you like this episode, I would also suggest to listen to episode 53 with Angela Hodge. Angela also experiences a surprise 3rd pregnancy. So tune into that one as well to hear about what she does differently. All right, let's get into this episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Birth as We Know It podcast. Today, I am excited to share with you the guest that I have is Kelli Tuttle, and Kelli will be talking to us today about the 3 births of her 3 kiddos, Nathan, Julia, and Talia. So, Kelli, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Go ahead and start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and who's in your family.
I am 57, so I am a lot older than most of your guests. I have a husband, Jim, and the 3 kids that you mentioned. So Jim and I dated like 5 years, then we finally got married, and we've been married 29 years. Early in our journey, even before we got married, I ended up having non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I found out when I was a substitute teacher and I was like 25 years old. And I remember the resident, he said, if I had to pick a cancer for my mom or my sister, I'd pick non-Hodgkin's. It's the most curable cancer besides thyroid cancer. So, it all went fine. I had radiation treatment, no chemo, but, they did radiate like 3.5 weeks in my lower body. So I was always worried if this was going to affect my fertility or anything like that, because I always knew I really wanted kids. So we started trying even before we got married, and it just took a really long time.
Knowing that you had to go through those radiations, that's really intense and scary and concerning, especially with it being in your lower body and having concerns about fertility. So when you realized that you kept trying for a while and nothing was happening, what decision did you make then?
Yeah, we tried for a while, and then I would go to my doctor, get some things checked out. Then she suggested that Jim go and get a whole workup and get checked out. And while he was doing all of his checkout, they found out he had thyroid cancer, the number 1 most curable cancer. So we both got cancer, but we both got like easy kinds of cancer, I guess. So that put a pause on the whole. I mean, we didn't stop trying, but we just had other things we had to take care of with him before we could try again. But then we started with Clomid, and then we did I think you called it IUI, the inseminations. I was staying more with like the OBGYN. I was meeting and finding out about the doctors at the University of Wisconsin Medical School. And then, IVF was really expensive, still is, but was really expensive. And so I found a place in Waukesha that's about an hour drive from my house that would do it a little bit cheaper than right here in Madison. So after 4 years of marriage, I would drive there a couple times a week, and they were able to retrieve 9 embryos, and they put in 3 fresh right away, and they froze the others, and it didn't work. So we went back 2 different times and did the frozen embryos, but overall, nothing worked. So I started looking into adoption, and my husband wasn't sure if he wanted to adopt, and he definitely wanted a baby that looked like our family. So we were exploring a lot of things. We did look at international, but then we decided to try for local. But finding a local healthy baby is hard. We went to 2 different agencies, and it didn't work out with them. I don't remember what happened with an agency called Special Beginnings, but I do know with Lutheran Social Services, they told us that they could serve 12 families per year with the whole adoption process. So they would do a lottery and pick 12 people a year. We didn't get picked. So our 3rd agency was called Children's Service Society of Wisconsin. They still exist, but they only do special needs adoptions now, I think. But we finally got accepted by them and got in with them and started to pursue adoption.
Wow. Yeah, that's a journey for sure. Going through that first process of IVF and realizing that things weren't sticking, what was going through your mind?
It was super depressing that, going through all those things. And then every time you get your period, you'd be like, oh my God, it didn't work again, and trying to be hopeful and trying to be positive and hope it would work, but then it wouldn't. My younger brother, he got married the same year as us, and they got pregnant pretty easily. I attended the birth of my nephew in 97, and it was just really hard because I was trying so hard to get pregnant and it wasn't working, but he was pregnant. But I went to that birth, and she had a just terrible birth. She was in labor for like 40 hours. When he finally came out, he was like blue, and they're like, turn off the video camera because we were videotaping. And then I ran to get her mother, the grandma, and I brought her like to how they have the birthing room and then they have that little extra room next to it where they often have the baby. And I brought her over there, like we were kind of peering in at him, and then they slammed the door on us and like wouldn't let us see the baby. I think they were super worried about him. So that was kind of scary to see that. But also, like I said, it was a little, I guess, part of me was jealous, part of me was sad. I was happy for them, but sad that it wasn't happening for us and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that can definitely be really challenging. How did that experience impact your relationship with your brother? Did it hinder your guys' relationship at all?
I think we kept it okay. I can remember during those 40 hours of labor, we went down to the cafeteria to get some food, and he said something like, you better get going. You're not getting any younger, because at this point I would have been, like, I think 31. And I'm like, you jerk. We are trying. We're trying hard here, I think it was just a little slip up. Usually he's a very sensitive guy. But it did affect my friendship with some of my teacher friends. Like, when they're all having babies, just naturally, we had some distance because they had these new young babies and I was struggling, and so it was a very hard time.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging because it kind of seems like it just turns into hyperfocus, right? Like,
yes, you notice every pregnant person, every ad about strollers and diapers, and yeah, you do become hyper-focused, definitely.
Yeah, so it doesn't make it any easier. So tell me about the moment that you realized that you were chosen to adopt Nathan.
Well, it was really kind of cool. You know how people put a letter in their Christmas card, like, oh, this is my family, this is what we did this year, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I made this one that said, like, this is a letter asking you for help. We're trying to build our family right now. And so if you hear of anybody who has an unplanned pregnancy, please, I even had like a little cut off here and give them the bottom of this letter. And it was basically like an adoption profile. It showed my husband and I, our house, our dog. It talked about what we wanted and things like that. And one of my friends, who's a teacher in Eau Claire, at her school, there was a educational assistant whose 15-year-old daughter was pregnant. And, at 15, the boyfriend was a little bit older. The family was kind of distraught. They didn't really know what they were going to do. I don't know if they would have considered abortion, but it was kind of too late by the time they all figured it out. So my friend gave her this letter, and in the letter, it asked her to call our adoption agency, and they had an office in Eau Claire. And so she started to go to counseling there, and then they set up a meeting for us to go and meet her and meet her family and stuff like that. So it was super exciting. But the family, they had 4 children, and this girl who was 15 was their oldest child. So they still had a girl who was like in 3rd grade. And we were really scared that they were just going to keep the baby because they're just a very loving family with 4 kids. And, we could just easily see them just saying like, no, we're just going to bring this baby into our family. And, so we were very worried that she would change her mind. But yeah, we kept having meetings, and this is an open adoption. It was, and it is still an open adoption. And at the time, I didn't really know much about that, And so I was a little bit worried because the birth family could be crazy or overbearing or, I can remember I think the very first meeting we went to, it was still winter time. And I think I put snow on my license plate so like they couldn't, it was just dumb. But I just like, well, in case they're, crazy, I don't want them like stalking us or something like that. But they turned out to be a wonderful family. And over the years, they feel like sort of how your in-laws feel, right? They weren't the family you were born with, but they're now part of your family. And it turned out to be a really, really great situation. So the birth mom was due originally in May. She knew it was a boy. I asked her what names she was thinking about, and she said she was thinking about Zachary or Nathan. And then I looked up the names, and Nathan means gift from God. So I'm like, oh, I think we better go with Nathan. So we both, the birth mom and I, agreed on Nathan. And like I said, she was supposed to be due in May if everything was accurate. She got prenatal care a little bit later than some people, but it was April of 2000. I was on spring break from my teaching. I was out to dinner with a whole bunch of teachers, and this is in the day before people had cell phones. And my husband called me at the restaurant and said that the birth mom had called him and that the baby was born. And so I still remember my friends all wrote little notes on napkins and things. And then I told the waiter, like, can you pack my food to go? I just had a baby. so we went home and we called our parents and things like that. And we decided not to drive up that night because it was already a little bit late, but that we would get up early the next morning and drive. And so we did, but we went to the wrong hospital first. And then we looked all over for a flower shop. So we wasted a lot of time. And by the time we got there, they're like, we're wondering if you're ever coming, But it was very cool. So Nathan was born at about 4:20 in the afternoon. And so we saw him the next day, and I got to change his diaper and feed him and things like that. And I almost feel like the birth mom went home that day, like 24 hours after birth. And so, like, they just let us stay in the room and hang out with the baby and feed the baby. And it was really great. But in Wisconsin in those days, the laws were different. And the law was that the baby had to go to foster care for about a month until the parents' rights were terminated. Logically, I can understand why that is, so that, you don't have the situation where the baby's with me and then the mom changes their mind and the baby gets taken away. But it was so hard to put him into foster care for a month. At least the foster care parents, they were a mom and dad who had 3 boys, and they were really great, and they let us come visit every weekend and things like that. But it was still hard to kind of know you have this baby, but yet the baby is not with you. So it's about a 2.5-hour drive from our house, and we still had jobs. And so we would go to work Monday through Friday, and then we would go up there for the weekend. And the same woman who handed the letter to the birth mom, she would let us stay with them, and we would even go get the baby from the foster parents and bring the baby to her house. We got to hang out with them every weekend, so that was good.
Oh, that's awesome. And I also wanted to say how cool that your Christmas letter that you sent out actually worked.
Yeah, I know. I didn't ever think it would work, but it was so cool that it did.
Yeah. So what was the next step that happened after that month of foster care was finalized?
There were 2 teeny glitches. One, he has a little bit of Native American blood. And so when that happens, they have to pursue the tribal leaders and get the leaders to sign off to say that it's okay. So that may be added a week, maybe. They had terminated the father's rights just in the adoption agency, I think. And we got to meet him also one day. We met him separate from the birth mom. And it was kind of cool to talk to him. But he was a 17-year-old teenage boy. It was just pretty interesting. And we felt ancient by that point. But anyway, the whole birth family took Nathan for Easter. Easter was really late that year. And they brought him to their house for Easter. And they bought us some gifts to bring home with him and things like that. But finally, we knew that the day before he was 1 month old, that was when the birth mom was going to the courthouse and she had her rights terminated. And we were waiting at the foster family. And then as soon as her rights were terminated, they called the foster family and then we were good to go and we could take him home.
Nice. That's awesome. So how did that drive home feel?
Well, it was super awesome, and he slept the whole way. I sat in the back seat with him, and my husband drove until we were within 20 to 30 minutes of our house, and this horrible thunderstorm came, and the baby woke up and was crying. It was like the last 30 minutes was really stressful, but we got home very late, like 10 p.m. But our neighbor had decorated our house with like, "It's a boy," and balloons out front, and we had a golden retriever at the time, so we brought him in to meet the golden retriever and stuff like that.
Oh, that sounds so awesome. Did you do anything with your dog prior? Like, did you let your dog smell blankets or hats of the baby before bringing him home that first official day?
Yeah, I think so. I think we did. I think the foster family let us bring some stuff home.
Nice. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So how did the feeding with Nathan go? Did you try to initiate lactation in yourself, or did you just go straight to formula and just make sure that he was eating well?
I tried one time, but it had already been a month of formula for him, and so we just went with it, and yeah, so he was formula fed. And it was really funny because, of course, everybody's different, right? But I nursed my two other kids, but Nathan was always the healthiest. Even though he was bottle fed, he never had colds. He was just always a very healthy kid.
That's awesome. That's great. That means he just has some really good genes in him and he's a really healthy guy. That's awesome. What was it like when you had him overnight for the first time? Did you still have that initial parenting moment of sleep deprivation with having him?
Yeah, and I was, of course, because I'd waited so long. I mean, I had a friend who she kind of tried to tell me, but of course I didn't listen, but to not overdo it. But I was just so happy to have this baby. Like, there were many nights I would just lay in the nursery on the carpet and have my hand up in his crib. We'd struggled a lot with trying on his back or trying on his side, trying things. He wasn't a real great sleeper. And then we called the foster parents, and they had him sleep in his car seat most of the nights. So I took his car seat and I put it in the crib, and he slept that way for a couple nights. But yeah, we had to adjust. We all had to adjust, but we did it.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. And did you or your husband experience any like postpartum mood disorders, anxieties, or anything like that after Nathan was with you?
Nope, we were just so happy, and everybody knew like the struggle we had gone through. So we had many, many, many visitors and many, many gifts, and people were just so awesome. And we brought him home on May 17th. So then I had the whole summer to like be with him and stuff like that. And actually, the adoption agency had a rule, which I think is a very good rule, but at least one parent has to stay home with the kid for the first 6 months. So I stayed with him like the first 4 months, and then my husband took off and stayed with him for the next 2 months.
Yeah, I think that is a good rule because then it lets the baby adjust and get used to their parents. So, at what point, after getting into the flow and rhythm of having Nathan, did you and your husband decide that you wanted to have a second child?
Well, I always knew I wanted to have more than one. And then my husband worked for a national company called Kinko's. It was those copy shops. They don't exist anymore, but I think it was early in 2001. We found out they would cover 80% of in vitro, which was unheard of back then. And so we're like, oh my God, we have to try again just because it's like almost free, and then we'll try again. And then if it doesn't work, we'll get back on the adoption list and stuff like that. So we started trying again, yeah, like in the fall of 2000. So Nathan was only like 6 months old, and we were starting to do the things again. Then it worked. I think there was maybe 6 embryos. and they put in 2. And I actually have a photograph of the petri dish with 2 embryos, the ones they put in. I remember it was early December, and I had the blood test. And he said, like, the blood test shows you're pregnant, but the numbers are really low. So we're really worried. We think it might not stick. But it did stick. And I guess somehow by Christmas, we knew it was legit, because I remember I wrapped up a little special charm for my mom, because at that point she had 3 grandsons, but no granddaughters yet. And so I wrapped up a little charm for her, and she opened on Christmas, and found out she was having a granddaughter. So that was very cool and very fun.
That sounds so sweet. I can't even just the thought that goes into announcements. I love that. And the fact that you kind of had to hide it from her a little bit. And then she actually finds out, like, yes, you're having a granddaughter. That's so exciting. That's so exciting. When the providers put in 2 embryos, were you also totally open to both of them sticking, like having twins?
Yes, I would have totally been happy having twins, totally. Because previous transfers hadn't worked, I was even a little bit nervous, like, don't we want to put in more than 2? But this was different because they were already growing pretty well. And so 1 stuck, but I would have been happy if both did.
So after you found out you were pregnant, did you experience any really intense pregnancy symptoms or cravings or anything like that?
I don't remember anything negative about that pregnancy. I was just so happy that I was finally pregnant, and I had this great little boy, little baby boy running around. So it was just a really good, happy time for us.
That's beautiful. So throughout that pregnancy with Julia, did you decide to do any childbirth education to prep you for labor?
Yes, we did. In fact, that's what my kids asked me, when did you get your first cell phone, Mom? This is when I got my first cell phone, because we were getting a babysitter for Nathan so he could go to the childbirth classes for Julia. Maybe it had like 6 sessions. It was offered through our HMO. It was pretty much your basic stuff, couples in the basement of the clinic and, stuff like that. But when I ended up going to the last session, it was kind of special. I was due August 28th, and I actually, crazy thoughts you have, right? I actually thought I would like her to be late so I could get everything set up for school and I could meet my class and maybe do a day or 2 or a week with them. Then I wanted to have the baby and go on leave. Well, of course, babies have their own plans, right? It was July. We had just gotten a Sony camcorder and we had gone to the University of Wisconsin. It's on a lake, beautiful terrace there, and you can have beer and brats, but you can also have ice cream and popcorn, and there's ducks to feed. And we were walking around there, my husband and I, my son, testing out this new camcorder, making some little home movies, walking around. Again, like, I can remember the outfit I had on. I was so cute. We were so happy. And then that night, we came home and we went to bed, and then like at 2 a.m, I felt like I had to go to the bathroom or something. So I went to the bathroom and fluid kept leaking out. And I think I sat in the bathroom for like an hour going like, is this urine or is this water? Did my water break? I don't know what this is. I'm like there forever. And then finally I'm like, I think my water broke. And so I woke up my husband. At this point, it's maybe like 3:30 in the morning or something. And he says we should call the hospital. So at this point, I was 5 weeks early or 5.5 weeks early. But I was never afraid. I don't know. It just, like, somehow I knew it was going to be fine. I was never, ever afraid or worried about it. We called the hospital and they said, yes, we should come in. And we told them that we have this little boy, tiny boy, and then we had to wait for somebody to come take care of him. So I called my mom at like 4 a.m. Again, because it was like 5.5 weeks early. People weren't expecting this yet. But she said she'd come down right away, but she's a 2.5-hour drive. Jim's mother was closer, but she's a lot older, like she was in her 70s. But anyway, we called her also, hoping that she could get there faster. And she did get there maybe about 6 a.m. or so. And then that's when we set off for the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, the people were like, we've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you. Where have you been? And I'm like, oh, well, we had to wait for somebody to take care of the baby. So, yeah, we finally got there and they hooked me up to all the monitors and stuff, but everything seemed fine. Everything was fine.
Good. I'm glad that everything was fine. And having to navigate that childcare in the early labor stage can get really complicated sometimes.
Especially when she came that early because we weren't quite ready.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you were all hooked up and everything was fine. How did things progress from there?
So that was about 6 a.m. and she wasn't born until like 4 in the afternoon. It all just, I don't know, progressed pretty normally. I think they had me try sitting on a yoga ball, walking around a little bit, but I was hooked up to everything. So I didn't have very much movement.
Do you remember if you needed any kind of augmentation like Pitocin to help your labor go along, or did you end up getting an epidural throughout your labor?
So we didn't need Pitocin, and I did not have an epidural. I did have Nubane. They just said it was like, take the edge off. That's just what they described it as. I don't know. So yeah, just maybe made it a little bit more tolerable, but I did not have an epidural. My mom showed up because the baby hadn't been born, and both grandmas were at home with the little boy in the afternoon. The mother-in-law sent my mom, go see what's going on, go there, and stuff like that. I'm just going to note that when I gave birth, my first birth, Julia, the room was filled with women, all women. My mom was there, 2 women nurses. The doctor was a woman. My husband was the only man. The third birth, that completely reverses. We have a videotape of it. I don't think I was yelling out all that much, but I was yelling out a little bit with contractions, and the nurse encouraged me to try to be quiet and reserve my energy. So when they did it in the episiotomy, and then it's kind of funny because I said, oh my God, I feel like somebody's cutting me with a knife, and somebody actually was. So I guess I felt all that. But she came out at 4:12. She was 5 pounds, 13 ounces. She breathed fine. They did not leave her on my belly or let my husband cut the cord or anything like that. They wanted to go pretty quickly into that other room and get her all checked out. But they said if it wasn't for IVF and when we knew the date she was put in, they're like, we wouldn't think she was early. They didn't feel like she looked or acted premature. The first 30 minutes or whatever, it was a little hectic. They had her on the side. They were checking her all out. They had somebody from the NICU come down and check her out. But it was all fine, and they gave her back to me. And then the next day, Grandma and Nathan came back together and stuff like that. So it was really good, positive, happy time. It was awesome.
That's great. That is so, so beautiful. Did you happen to reflect on your birth compared to your brother's birth of his son?
I don't think at the time I reflected, but like if I reflect now, my God, that was just so traumatic that they went through, and mine was just so not traumatic and happy. I mean, of course I was in pain, and I can remember my mom getting a little teary-eyed watching me be in pain, but yeah, it was cool. So the birth class I told you about, we still had one more session to go. And in that session, they would invite people from the previous class to come back and show their babies and talk about the experience. Well, hello, now I've had the baby already. So I also went there and talked about my experience. And, we're sitting on a little stage. There's not that many people there. We're talking about our experiences. And of course, Julie gets upset and I have to try to breastfeed her like on stage. I mean, I turned my chair sideways, so I was kind of sideways. I wasn't full view on, and I had this cute little nursing shirt, but I was like, oh my God, here I am, like on stage, like breastfeeding my baby who's like 6 days old or something like that. It was kind of wild.
Yeah. So speaking of breastfeeding, how did that breastfeeding journey go with Julia? Were there any complications? Was it smooth sailing? Let us know all the details.
It actually was smooth sailing. I always worried that maybe I wasn't making enough milk, but it went well. It went fine. I think maybe I went back to work like October or November, maybe. So I used to pump at work. That was really, thank God, almost all buildings, including like public school buildings now, have gotten with the program and seem to have a lactation room. But not in those days. I had this humongous classroom with 2 doors. I would like lock the doors and I put up the signs like, do not come in. But I still remember one time a custodian like starting to come in and I'm like, don't come in. No, don't come in. The pumping thing was a hassle, but otherwise things went really well.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I can relate to a similar experience where I was in college and I was pumping for my oldest. and they have a nursing room, but it's a little complicated because the doors are like, you can lock it, but as soon as you turn the handle, it unlocks from the inside. And I didn't know that. So I would lock it and then I would check to see if it was locked. And I'm like, okay, it's
And you'd
locked.
really
And then I
unlock
sat
it.
down and I unlocked it. And then so I sat down and I was pumping and stuff. And then my professor happened to walk in on me when I was pumping. And I was like, oh my gosh. But luckily it was a woman professor. And she was like, she already knew, like, you know, like I had just gotten out of her class because the pumping room was also the break room / lunch room for the professors.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. And I was like, okay. And there was this like makeshift wall that was put up with a really tall bookshelf. And then there was, you know, a plug-in outlet and then a chair that you could sit on. But it didn't hide much. So
yeah.
She got to see all the goods.
Yeah, that whole situation's kind of crazy, man.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So tell me how the adjustment with Nathan and Julia was. Like, now you have 2 kiddos. How was that for you?
Again, I mean, my whole life hasn't been peaches and roses, but again, like, I was just like on cloud 9. I had 2 kids, which I had worked so hard to get, and I was just like so happy. And they're close in age, so they would always be like playing together, you know. And then I haven't talked about it yet, but my husband was able to make his schedule. He worked Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 10-hour days. And I worked Monday through Friday in the normal school schedule. So we only had to find childcare for Mondays. And my mom would often come down 1 or 2 Mondays a month. And so one of us was always home, and things were rolling pretty well at that point.
That's beautiful. That's super awesome. So then you have Nathan and you have Julia, and you guys are just living life. And then boom, what happens?
Yeah, so judging by the age, when right after Julia's like first birthday, and Nathan would have been like 2.5. Of course, I hadn't been using birth control because it took me 6 years to get pregnant. I wasn't worried about that, you know. And we had talked about, do we want a 3rd child? We had talked about it. We hadn't made a decision yet, you know, but no birth control and just going about our lives. And it was like November, and I had gone to, I think it was my annual physical or something like that. And so we were talking, and maybe I was late, or maybe I didn't even know when I should have had my period. I don't know. But, you know, like I said, I was very skeptical. I'm like, oh, I'm probably not pregnant. I'm, you know, what are the chances after all that stuff I went through that I would be pregnant? And so she's like, well, let's just do a pregnancy test anyway. Let's just do it. I remember I had Julia in the bathtub. Like, this is like 7 o'clock at night. I had Julia in the bathtub. I had a glass of red wine with me because I was thinking, like, this might be the last chance that I have to drink if I turn up pregnant, you know? So I was in the bathroom, and I had that wine there. And then the doctor called me, and she said, congratulations, you're pregnant. I'm like, what? No, I'm not, you know? So yeah, that was kind of wild. And I remember I ran downstairs and I told my husband, and I was kind of like, what do you think? And he's like, well, there's not much to think about now. Like he's kind of saying, like, you can't turn back. But I was kind of like, can you be a little more excited or something? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's so amazing. So after going through 2 cycles of IVF with an adoption in the middle, you find out that you are just naturally pregnant. So, man, the emotions that you're probably going through are like, okay, well, first off, the decision is made. We are having 3 kids. Tell me how Talia's pregnancy was for you. Was it different at all than Julia's?
Yeah, it was a little different. And then, like, when you talked about the emotional stuff, around that time, I was having some bouts of depression. I started an antidepressant. It could have been, might have been before I got pregnant, because we might have switched from Zoloft to Prozac or vice versa because of the pregnancy. I think I got shingles, you know, just more stressful because there's just more stuff going on in our lives, and teaching and, you know, all that. So yeah, it was more stressful than the other 2. I felt a little down. I remember I was at school, and I was super weepy that day, like crying a lot that day. And I had an appointment after school, and I went in to this like checkup appointment, and the doctor said, well, you're not going back to school anymore. And I'm like, what? And she's like, you're in labor. She's like, you're done with school. I'm like, okay. I'm like, oh my God. Like I said with Julia, how I wasn't worried that she was early, but this was super early, 30.5 weeks. So they transferred me to the hospital. They put me on bed rest. They gave me that steroid shot to make the lungs develop in case she's born. I have 2 toddlers at home. Thank God my mom is a saint. So she came to stay and help my husband with these kids. And I was just there in the hospital, and it was super boring because all I would do is just lay in this bed, and they would say, like, you can get up to go to the bathroom, but that's it, And I read books. I think I wrote maybe in a diary or a baby book or something, but it was just really boring, where my mom and my husband were stressed out, and, I'm just laying there. One thing I remember, I sold or returned all my maternity clothes. Like any maternity clothes that I had bought, I told my husband to send back, like I'm not wearing any of those. I'm wearing this hospital gown, and then I'm going to have this baby. So
As Kelli and I were talking at this time, she let me know that she was on bed rest in the hospital for 11 to 12 days. And then they sent her home when she was 32 weeks gestation with the requirement of being on bed rest at home for 4 more weeks. Once she reached 36 weeks, they considered baby to be term and had no concerns.
So I imagined at 36 weeks I would stand up and she would just come out, But 36 weeks came and no baby. But I remember my husband and kids going to a wedding during that time, and my mom went with them, and I did not go to the wedding. And so I do remember laying low for some things. It was just weird because, I just assumed she would be born early, and she wasn't, and I was humongous. And there's 2 things, a happy story and a sad story. But the happy story is my brother and his wife and their 2 sons came down, and we went to the swimming pool. And like I said, I'd given away all my maternity clothes, so I wore a bikini with my big old belly hanging out there. We went to the pool and stuff like that. That was like the 4th of July. That's what we did for the 4th of July. But my grandmother was dying at the same time, and so I wanted to be induced. I wanted to have the baby so I could get up and visit my grandmother 2.5 hours away. They wouldn't let me travel. And so what I had to do is every morning call and see if they had room for me to come in, and they never did. And Talia ended up coming 4 days overdue. We went in a couple of times. Like, my mom was trying to stay here as much as she could so we could go to the hospital, but yet also her mother is dying, so it was a really hard time for her. We went in on July 10th, about 1 a.m., and my mom said, call her at 6 a.m., but at 6 a.m. I was really busy. I couldn't call. But I told you there's going to be a contrast. When Talia was born, the room was all men. The doctor was a man. The nurse was a man. My husband was there, a man. And it's like, because I told you about the other one where I was surrounded by women. This one, I was surrounded by men. It was just kind of weird. And I got the new vein shot again, but not an epidural. And I just kept saying to them, it's my second time. It's supposed to be easier. This is the second time. It's supposed to be easier and stuff like that. But where Julie was 5'12", Talia was 8 pounds, 9.5 ounces. So she was much, much, much bigger.
Which does not make it easier.
No, it's harder. And I did not have an epidural, but I went back a couple days later because I'm like, something's not right here. And they're like, yeah, it's kind of like ground beef down there.
Oh, no.
They're like, just keep putting ice packs down there. And it's like, But when Talia finally came out at 6:50 a.m., they had given me a shot of Nubain too close to when she actually came out. So when she came out, they put her on my tummy, and my husband cut the cord and stuff like that. But then again, boom, she was rushed off to that little side room, and they were giving her oxygen, and they were doing stuff because she was like too groggy. She had gotten some of the medicine, the drugs, and she was like not really waking up as much as they wanted her to. So like with both girls, they just had to be, whisked away and spent some time over there. But she woke up, and then she came back, and we breastfed, stuff like that. The thing that was also funny, she was born close to the 4th of July, and my husband was busy with the other 2 kids. My mom had to go back home and was busy with her dying mom, and then all the other friends in my life, I guess, were on vacation. I don't know. It was just Talia and I chilling in that room forever. And like I said, they were busy, so they put us in this old part of the hospital that had windows that would actually really open. So I remember I had the windows open, and she was in a little incubator next to me. And the nurse came in, and she's like, she's too cold. She either has to snuggle right next to you, or I have to take her to the nursery. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll take her, So I put her inside my gown and stuff like that. But it was very interesting. It was just her and I, like really no visitors.
Sounds like complete opposite from Julia's. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Like
Yep.
down to the sex of the providers,
Yes.
Males this time, not as much family available, lots of other things going on. And it's just so interesting, isn't it, how life just goes on. Life continues. And it's such an interesting thing to be the person sitting at this life-changing moment while knowing everything else and everyone else is still moving on around you.
Yeah. The rest of the world's going on. Just she and I here chilling with this moment.
Yeah. So how was your breastfeeding journey with Talia?
It went well. It went fine. Again, the pumping at work. And I did not really have all that many days left to take because, I've had all these other kids and sicknesses and stuff like that. So I made a deal with my principal that I would only take off the first 4 Wednesdays of the school year. And I had read somewhere that taking off the Wednesday would help with the breastfeeding. So you have like 2 days where you have to work and pump, and then you have a day where you can relax and just breastfeed. And then you do 2 more days, work and pump. So I did that, where I was talking about how blissful everything was with the first 2 and stuff like that. This was just like, wow, life's going on, and we're like working, and we're going to funerals, and we're doing stuff, and we're chasing kids, and we're just doing life, Yeah.
So how was your postpartum mood after Talia? Did it continue to fluctuate? Were you still having depressive moments?
I stayed on antidepressants ever since I was pregnant with her, but it was always very stable, really. Like, I didn't have any severe moments. I wasn't suicidal. I didn't have any big breakdowns. I had the stressors of money and life and all the normal stressors, but it was nothing like abnormal. But interesting, Talia, starting like her freshman year of high school, she's had a lot of mental health issues, and I always wonder, is it like because I started those antidepressants when I was pregnant with her, or is it because of stressors I had when I was pregnant with her, or did any of those things influence her own mental health? I, probably will never know, but I always wonder about that.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting concept and idea because there is more research coming out. I don't have any numbers or exact articles or anything, but there is more research coming out about how babies are impacted in the womb and how it does stick with them over time. So that's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, like I said, where the other 2, I'm like, yeah, everything's perfect, it's great, yeah, la, la, la. Everything about her was more stressful. And it's so funny, she was a baby who never liked to sleep, and she was very loud. Her cries, and when she became like a child, her yelling, so very loud. And we always said, oh, it's those steroid shots they gave you at 30 weeks. Like, they developed your lungs too well.
You got some really good lungs on you, girl.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Man, so yeah, that sounds awesome. I love hearing the journeys of how you were a mom 3 times. It was so different every single time. First one is adoption. Second one is IVF. Third one is surprise. So this is just a true example of how every single time it's different. So I really do appreciate you sharing your stories with me. And I do just have 3 final closing questions for our interview today. My first question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to all pregnant people to prepare for labor, birth, and postpartum?
I would just say, read, go to classes, visit hospitals, visit doulas, visit whoever you might want to visit. Just learn as much as you can, because knowledge is power. And the more you know, the more you can make a good decision for yourself and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great piece of advice. My next question is, what is one resource that I can share with my listeners on your behalf?
Resolve. Resolve is a support group for people who are experiencing infertility. And I actually was the president of Resolve for a while when I was going through it here, because the doctors had told me they used to have a chapter, but now nobody was running it. And I started running it. But then after you get pregnant and you have babies, you don't really have time, or you're not really appropriate to be running it anymore. So yes, Resolve is a very good resource. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My last question for you is, if you could describe each of your births with one word, what would it be?
I guess Nathan would be joy. I know it's not my birth, but getting him was very joyful. Julia's I know it's not one word, but it was all surprising, but yet it was very calm and good. And Talia, it was just, God, I hate to say stressful. When she hears it, I don't want her to feel bad, but there was just so much more stress that last time than the other time,
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate with you. My third pregnancy and entire birth was stressful. It was very stressful. It was a lot different, and it's just our lived experience, and it's true. So it's true to our own feelings. So I hope that Talia doesn't get upset when she hears it. Talia, you're still awesome, I'm sure. But yes, so thank you so much, Kelli. I truly enjoyed hearing these stories because I think it's very important to talk about the different ways that people become parents, like adoption and the need to access infertility treatments such as IVF, IUI. Also, you got to experience all three ways of becoming a parent. So I love that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Interviewing Kelli for this episode was actually really educational, and the fact that she experienced becoming a parent 3 different ways is truly amazing. Kelli, thank you so much again for sharing your story with me. I'm sure that the Baki listeners are excited to hear it too. And if you made it this far, you are a true Baki listener. So I would really love for you to join the Birth As We Know It podcast private community on Facebook. You can do that by going to birthasweknowitpodcast.com/community. And if you'd like this episode, don't forget to go check out episode 53 with Angela Hodge. She also talks about her experience of a surprise third pregnancy. Do you think she felt similar to Kelli? Go check it out and let me know on the Birth As We Know It Facebook group. For the next episode, I interview a good friend of mine named Elliot Leslie. Elliot talks about the birth of her 2 kiddos, Adelaide and Brennan. Both of her babies were breached, and she talks about what it's like to have a heart-shaped uterus, which led her to having 2 C-sections. All right, thanks for hanging on this long, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.